Okay, I'm here. I'm here today with writer Mike Carey, who most of you probably know for having been at DC Vertigo as the writer of Lucifer and the Neverwhere adaptation, and at Marvel in XMen Legacy and Ultimate Fantastic Four. What some of people may not know is that Mike lately has been engaging in prose writing, and that's something that I wanted to get out of the way and show the comic book people, because some of them don't have much patience for books without pictures. The first big thing you did was the Castor Felix series, which is kind of a what do you call it, an exorcist. And it's funny that you coming from comics, the first thing you create is a character within a series. And nowadays there's a lot of people wanting to write trilogies that can be adapted to movies.
Sure.
When you created Castor Felix, were you thinking that it was going to be an ongoing series? Were you thinking about adaptations into other mediums?
I certainly wasn't thinking of adaptations, but I was thinking that this would be. I wanted it to be a vehicle for a whole sequence of stories, and I had some ambitious ideas about where it would go. What I pitched was the basic idea of the character. And he's kind of he's an exorcist with a sort of Raymond Chandler flavour to him. At least that's what I was setting out to do, to create a character who, although he existed in a supernatural world, is a little bit like the Raymond Chandler private detective, in that he walks the mean streets. He does it for the money, and it's not very much money. It's that, he wears a trench coat. It's that kind of archetype, but it's applying that to a world where the dead are rising, and where his skills are more about dealing with the dead and banishing and binding demons and ghosts, rather than solving crimes, although inevitably he ends up solving crimes as well. So I pitched the idea, and I pitched the first 3 novels, but I always had it in mind that there could be a sequence of about 6 or 7 novels building up to one big reveal about why is this happening now at this stage in human history.
But overall, it seems like a very proletarian use of an exorcist. It seems to be heavily engaged in his job. How do you see these characters? When these characters engage they dabble in the supernatural? Is it natural everyday occurrence to them, like going out for a loaf of bread, or?
Yeah, I think that's part of the appeal of the series. That basically it's a world where that stuff has become the new normal. Mm-hmm. From the second book onwards, like in the first book, I played very, very cautiously, and it was really just about one crime. This is the solution of one crime, and you don't get to see much of the wider world. But from the second book onwards, I was asking, how would society have changed? What sort of infrastructure would have been created if the dead were with us all the time, and if the dead were with us in different forms, not just ghosts, but also zombies and weird creatures and so on. How would society have shifted to accommodate them? And so you get things like I created a character called the Ice Maker, mm-hmm. who's basically making a living out of faith healing for zombies, mm-hmm. and she lowers their core temperature with a laying on a pan, so that they will last longer before they decay. So it's people are starting to make a living. Mm-hmm. I guess Castor in a different way is making a living out of the Walking Dead. So yeah, I think you can accommodate to anything. I think people are incredibly resilient. If we do have an apocalypse, the day after the apocalypse, people will be finding a way to make money out of it.
After that, you created these. You wrote two novels with your family, your wife, brother, and your daughter. And how easy is it to work with your family in a creative endeavor? And how much do you argue, and who gets to put in what in the story?
It's not easy, but it is incredibly worthwhile, incredibly rewarding. Any kind of collaboration takes twice as long or 3 times as long as doing it by yourself, because the essence of collaboration is talking about it, is communication. So for an awful long time, we just met and we talked and we talked and we talked. We used to have long Chinese meals, takeaway meals from a Chinese restaurant near our house, and then we would talk as we ate. And we would jot down notes, and then we'd meet the next week and jot down more notes. It was a year and a half before we put any words on paper. But I think the reward, the payoff, is that you find a voice that works for everybody. In this case, there were three of us. And so you have to sort of step out of your comfort zone. You have to try and do things in a different way. Mm-hmm. And we found a voice, and we wrote in that voice, and it was very satisfying. And then coming out of that, I think I was in a different place creatively. I think I've been sensitized to some things that I normally did without thinking about them, and my style evolved a long way in the course of that. But also, it was just crazy fun. We did argue. We argued a lot, but nobody killed anyone, so it was also good.
Well, the stories use a historical setting, where you're usually been more of a contemporary setting guy.
The second one has a historical setting, right. Which is the War of the Austrian Succession in the 18th century. The first one, it's sort of a pretend historical setting. It's the sort of it's the hazy ancient days of the Middle East, but it's not a real or fully realized Middle East. It's kind of the world of the Arabian Nights, the world of the 1001 Nights, which is, it's almost ahistorical. You know, there's nods towards history, but you don't have to pin yourself down to a particular time.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing you did, the girl with all the gifts, which was adapted into a movie. When you were involved with the production, how easy was it for you to transfer the basic concepts of the novel into another medium, considering your expertise in working with something that's already visual? Did that make it any easier?
In some ways, it made it harder, because a comic script and a movie script work very differently. And I did initially, when I started doing movie screenplays, I wrote them as though they were comics. And the crucial difference is that when you write a comic, you are not just the writer, you're the director and you're the cinematographer. You're very much in control of pace and structure. You're responsible for the mise en scène, if that makes any sense. So you're giving the artist very, very detailed instructions about what to put in the panels, about the transitions between the panels, the point of view and perspective, and the page breaks. Mm-hmm. You don't have any of those powers when you're writing a screenplay. When you're writing a screenplay, you have to write in a loose, imagistic way, and then you let the director make decisions of how to render the effects that you're describing. You can't try to nail every detail down. If you do, the director will kill you.
Right.
So it was hard. It was not an easy transition to make. But the beauty of it was the novel. I was writing the novel and the movie at the same time, and the two grew together in a very organic way. So they do the same thing, but they do it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Of all of your novels, for a comic book crowd, which one should they try first?
I think there's an argument for trying Girl with All the Gifts first. It just works. I think it's one of the most successful things I've ever written. It works because the central character works. Mm-hmm. It's about a young girl who is also a monster. She's an innocent, but she is a monster. And it's about growing up. It's about finding your place in the world. And I think it's got an emotional power because the character came together in a very, very effective and convincing way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And now moving on to your beginnings in comics, like a lot of British writers, you started on 2000 AD. Is it a necessary step that British writers should do before they move on to other things? Because I think I suppose it doesn't pay that much nowadays.
No, it pays okay, but it doesn't pay as much as the American publishers do. To be honest, I didn't start at 2000 AD. I went backwards. I started doing indie stuff for a rival company called Apocalypse Press.
Okay.
There was a comic called Toxic, which was trying to be the new 2000 AD. It lasted 6 months, and then it died. And then I got some work for American publishers, Malibu, Caliber, and then DC. And then I came back and did some 2000 AD work. But I think 2000 AD has been an incredible showcase for British creators. There's so many people who started out there have gone on to do amazing things in the States. So it's a wonderful thing to have on your CV. It's a wonderful calling card to have. But every British comics creator is aiming to work in America, really, because our market is very small.
Your stories, Carver Hale and 13, are available in collections nowadays?
I think they are. I'm not sure whether they're still in print, but they were collected.
Okay. Is that something that people should still read, considering how long ago they were made, or do you think they're still hold up okay?
I think 13 is worth reading still. I mean, Carver Hale has gorgeous art. Mike Perkins did an amazing job on the art, but I think the storytelling was very choppy, because I'd never written in 5-page installments, in those tiny installments before, and I was still figuring out.
You have to pack a lot every story.
You do, and then you have to end on a cliffhanger for the next episode and so on. And I don't think I did it right with Carver Hale, but in 13, it came together and I knew what I was doing. So I'm quite proud of 13. When I look at Carver Hale, I just think that looks beautiful. It doesn't read particularly well.
Okay. Also, like many British writers, you ended up at Vertigo. And the things that made you, I guess we should say that, stuff that were created by other writers, Hellblazer by Alan Moore and Lucifer by Neil Gaiman. How much did you feel that you had control of the character and setting, considering you were working on something that came from before?
I was given an amazing amount of freedom, actually. I started out with Lucifer, obviously, and I was a huge Sandman fan. I adored Sandman, and I still do. I think Sandman was doing things with long-form storytelling in comics that nobody had ever done before. It was a new template, and I was very, very excited to be able to play with those characters and to write stories in that world. I was too excited to be afraid. But Neil was an incredibly generous collaborator. He almost never said no to me. If I said I wanted to do this or that, he'd say, "Well, think about." He'd give me some ideas for things that could work into it, but he would never shut me down. And in the end, I think my Lucifer starts out as being very, very much his Lucifer, and then as the series goes on, I start to pull it in a different direction and to use him to explore ideas about free will and predestination. And he becomes I think he subtly becomes a different character. And I've introduced my own sort of cast around him. What I did get from Sandman more than anything else was the idea of using your protagonist as a catalyst for other people's stories. Morpheus in the Sandman, he's often not present for whole issues at a time. Other people have stories, have adventures because of him. And in the same way, Lucifer will kickstart stories that other people then take the lead in. So I had a lot of freedom and a lot of control. I never felt sort of like closed in. With Hellblazer, I think Hellblazer, John Constantine changes radically every time a new writer comes on board, and yet somehow there's a core of him that's still recognizably John.
Right.
But every writer sort of puts their own spin on it.
Like moving in and out of different jobs and moving to different cities. That's John Constantine.
Yep.
Yeah.
And sometimes changing his mind about what his regular drink is. when Garth Ennis wrote him, he drank Guinness.
Lucifer, something that comes out of Western mythology. You work with different mythological aspects in other series like Crossing Midnight and Voodoo Child. How much did you have to investigate to figure out the the basic mythologies in order to adapt them to your stories, and on stuff like voodoo. How much from an outsider's perspective did you approach it in trying to bring it to a Western audience?
Mm-hmm. I think it's inevitably an outsider's perspective. I think it's a respectful outsider's perspective. Somebody told me once that if you do research properly, research turns into story. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true. Having said that, I'm not Alan Moore. You know, there are writers who research meticulously and comprehensively, mm-hmm. and I don't. I dig deep, but I don't spend a huge amount of time doing it. Mm-hmm. And then when I've got enough for the story, I'll stop and I'll go away and I'll write. In Voodoo Child, there are a number of incantations, and they're not really voodoo incantations. They're hymns. I just took the words of hymns because it seems to me you shouldn't use other people's religious ceremonials if you're not in that religion. Right. So I used something else that would seem appropriate, but it's not quite the same thing. I think the great thing about using myth or folklore as the basis for a story is that you get an incredible. They buy you an incredible amount of energy and an incredible amount of momentum. Those stories have been around for centuries or for millennia, because they kept on working for generation after generation of people. They still had a power, and if you borrow or steal elements from those stories, you borrow that power as well. That's a great starting point for storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Now, Marvel. The first time I saw your name was actually in Ultimate Fantastic Four, and the Ultimate Universe had some expectations that it was the same but not the same. When you were introducing your own stories into the Ultimate Universe, which aspects did you want to preserve from the original Fantastic Four, or from Elektra and when you did Elektra? In Vision? Well, Vision is probably the most different, I guess.
Yeah, Vision is sort of hard SF, isn't it? Mm-hmm. With Vision, I was just picking up where Mark Millar left off, and he'd already sort of, I think, defined the new Vision in a very crystal clear way, mm-hmm. and it was a really cool concept for the character, and I just sort of carried on in that same direction. With Ultimate Fantastic Four, what I wanted to get was the same sense of wonder, because what Fantastic Four had meant for me as a child was, anything can happen. As soon as you turn the page, you're in a world that has absolutely no limits. It's a world of miracles, mm-hmm. and I wanted it, my stories, to have some of that unpredictability, some of that incredible scale to them. But the brief, I think, was to go back to the original Stan Lee and Jack Kirby stories, mm-hmm. and to choose stories that already meant something to you, and then find a way to tell them to a modern audience, changing the furniture but leaving the emotional mm-hmm. the emotional core intact.
Marvel, with them having changed the characters to teenagers, did it help?
That was a smart call, I think. Yeah, because they're discovering themselves at the same time as they're mm-hmm. discovering the world. I think adolescent characters are fun to write for that reason, because everything is new and exciting about them.
But super smart adolescent characters, they sound like smartasses a bit.
They do, yeah, and then that there is a danger. But you've got Ben to mm-hmm. the Thing to kind of like bring them down to earth a bit, mm-hmm. to undercut the seriousness. And the charming thing about Reed is, yes, he's a know-it-all. He's incredibly smart, except when it comes to human relationships. He's got a vulnerability to him, and that makes him easier to relate to.
Mm-hmm. The Reed-Sue dynamic in the original Lee and Kirby stories are basically the glue that was the Fantastic Four together. How does this very young Sue rein in Reed's adolescent behavior? Because since she's the same age, she doesn't have that mom aspect that she had in the original Fantastic Four.
No, that's true, and I think that plays out interestingly in the stories, because over, I guess the original series lasted about 60 or 70 issues, and you are actually seeing Reed go off the rails to some extent. He's not reined in or focused in the ways that the sort of the middle-aged read of the 616 universe is. He makes mistakes. He makes some very serious mistakes, and is constantly having to compensate for them. One of the things I played out over my issues was the idea that the two of them, they hit that period in a relationship. If you get very, very intensely involved with somebody very fast, there's you're on this sort of like convergence. There's always a point where you bounce off each other and you go through a turbulent phase where you can't actually make it work. So I put them through that, and then I brought them together again, which was fun to do.
You also had some chances to explore parts of the Ultimate Universe that were not present, because even in Spider-Man you feel that I kind of noticed that because they used some people that had worked in the Wildstorm characters, that the old military aspect changed. It was sort of a Wildstorm version of Marvel. Did you purposely want to get away from that?
I guess I wanted, because Fantastic Four was always a sci-fi comic. It was a big ideas sci-fi comic. Sometimes it was a big dumb object sci-fi comic. I wanted those things to be front and center, and I also wanted the other aspect, the fact that they're a family. You know, the X-Men are a tribe, but the Fantastic Four are a family. I wanted to bring that in as well and make that be the sort of the emotional heart of it. There was a very cool issue early on in the Stan Lee, Jack Kirby Fantastic Four, where Spider-Man tries to join them,
right?
And they have to explain to him that they don't work like that. They're not the Avengers. They're just a group of friends, very, very good friends who work really well together.
You know, since you brought up X-Men, let's move on to that. You got the X-Men, and was a pivotal moment in their history. No More Mutants.
Yep.
And did you felt somehow limited by having a smaller pool of characters to work with, or did that give you the other expectations?
I was sad. I was sad that so many characters had been taken off the table. But having said that, I came on board at the same time as Ed Brubaker. You know, he took over Uncanny at the same time as I took over X-Men Without an Adjective. He chose his core team of 6 or 7 characters, and I was told you can have anybody else you want. And at that point, it hadn't entirely been determined who had lost their powers and who hadn't. So I was able to feed into those decisions and say, I want these characters to still be involved. And all the way through my run, I was drawn to characters who had been neglected, characters who were relatively underused. You know, characters like Karima Shapanda, Lady Mastermind, who I thought were pretty cool, but who had only sort of popped up once or twice in continuity. There were still lots that you could do to define them because they were relatively
and having many of the majors losing their powers allowed them the opportunity to grow in their stead.
To take the spotlight, yeah. I guess I was most pleased with, with characters who had been sort of like D-list villains, like Unuscione I used at one point. I used quite a lot of the sort of Mutant Defense League characters, people like that, and the Acolytes. Frenzy was the other character I really enjoyed writing.
You had the chance to finally cure Rogue, so to say. Did you feel that she had spent enough time not being able to control her powers? Was that something that was necessary for her to grow?
I just thought it was kind of silly that Professor X brings her into the X-Men with that promise.
Right. And he never does it.
And he never pays off on the promise. And he's smart enough that he should have been able to figure out a way to do it. But I wanted to sort of push her back there, sort of push her forward from that kind of weird suspended animation that she'd been in for so long.
She, as far as having been a villain, she was also someone that the other mutants that used to be villains could relate to, that give them a chance to become X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I liked I mean, one of the reasons why I kept going back to Rogue was that I liked the fact that she is a sort of, as with Cyclops, a character of immensely strong passion, who for the most part presents as steely and controlled.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she reins it in. But every so often, you get the chance to let her cut loose and do like incredible and unexpected things. So the first issue that I ever wrote has her touching Cyclops and Emma Frost at the same time, and using both powers. So she focuses Cyclops' force beams through her diamond hand to refract them. I wanted to do stuff like that was visually and conceptually fun, and also was in keeping with her character, because I think she's a great sort of a great innovator, somebody who's kind of like anarchic and unpredictable.
Your apotheosis in X-Men sort of was Age of X, and the Age of Apocalypse comparisons were inevitable, but they were. When you read them, it's like you're going to Legion's first appearance in New Mutants. They're stuck in his mind.
Yep. It's not really like Age of Apocalypse. It's not nearly that huge.
Why do you, Legion was also one of those neglected characters. Xavier's son. You should expect the Xavier's son would have to become a big deal, given who his father was. Was that something also that you wanted to explore?
Yeah. Again, it just seemed weird that he was there, but nobody was doing anything with him. Mm-hmm. Because he's Xavier's son. He's colossally overpowered. He's colossally dangerous. It sort of feels like, as with Rogue, this is something that the X-Men have to address. Right. But I initially pitched it as just a 3-part story, and it was Daniel Ketchum, who was my editor at the time, who said, this is actually bigger than that, isn't it? Shouldn't we make this bigger? And so he said I could have the 3 issues of New Mutants and do it as a crossover. He gave me the Alpha issue. We ended up with the Age of X universe stories that Suspiria did.
Which kind of made it look like Age of Apocalypse from the outside.
Yeah. So it just became this sort of. I mean, even then it wasn't huge, but it was a big, substantial story. I just loved writing it. I loved reinventing the characters, imagining what they would be in this darker X-Men-less world. And I had the great pleasure after I finished writing it, and they brought out the trade. They did a little box set of the Kubricks, the little toy characters. Right. So they did a pack of Age of X versions of the X-Men, which I've still got sitting on my shelf.
Okay. Now you mentioned Legion is insanely overpowered. I think there's when you picking up the X-Men on the verge of extinction. Also, your work on the Human Torch mini-series, where they exploit the technology that created him, and your latest comic, Suicide Risk, with the power levels growing in terms of how they affect the world. There's sort of this thing that superpowers are dangerous. How do you reconcile wanting to explore those characters that are insanely super powerful, but also presenting them as a danger to the world?
I guess that's going to change from project to project. It's going to change according to which universe you're working in. The Marvel universe, they've now experienced 60 plus years, 70 plus years of having these characters around. So mostly you're dealing with a world that accepts the existence of superheroes and kind of rolls with it. And you have government agencies using superheroes like the Avengers to sort of control the situation, so you get the sense of a status quo. Right. With Suicide Risk, I didn't have any of that baggage, so I was able to sort of to imagine a world where the existence of superheroes is pushing it towards Armageddon. Basically, it's not a sustainable situation at all. I think it also depends on whether you're going to be using the characters in an ongoing way, or whether you have a story that reaches an end point. So Suicide Risk was planned as 2 years of stories. There was no need to imagine what the world would be like after that. Whereas you pick up the X-Men or you pick up the Fantastic Four, and you're aware that you're writing some chapters. Sorry, you're writing some chapters in a story that's
Right.
gonna
Because
continue
you know other
beyond
people
you.
will write it if you move on.
So there are limits to how far you can tamper with the status quo.
And that's a good point to round up the interview because your latest comic was for Boom Studios, and you haven't worked for the majors in a few years. Both from a professional point of view, including financial stability, and both from a point of view of your own creativity. How desirable is it after a certain time to stay within the big companies' sphere?
Ooh, that's a tough question. I mean, for me, the real reason why I'm not working for DC and Marvel at the moment is that because I'm doing a lot of prose writing and I'm doing a lot of screenwriting, I couldn't take on a book in a franchise. I couldn't write X-Men as a monthly. I couldn't write a DCU character as a monthly because it just takes too much time. You've got to read all the other stuff that's going on in the line. You've got to be completely up to speed with the universe that you're writing in. If you're working for Marvel, this never happened to me at DC because I never wrote in the DCU. But when I was writing for Marvel, every few months they would fly me over to the States for the creative summit so that I could talk to other editors and writers and sort of brainstorm, what's going to happen over the next few arcs and so on. So it's an enormous commitment in terms of time. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful thing to do, but right now I can't do it. So I mostly come up with ideas for 4-issue minis or 6-issue minis or just like done in one graphic novels, and I pitch them to the sort of not the majors but the smaller companies because they're more likely to sort of give you a quick yes or no. Right. So that's a big part of it. But having said that, I am writing Barbarella, and that's for a whole year, so it's a slightly longer commitment.
Barbarella is something that's a bit different from. You're still working on somebody else's character, but Barbarella is a different mythology all around, and she comes with some baggage attached because of all the space babe.
Yeah, the cheesy movie.
Yeah.
The original comic, I mean, I think she's a fascinating character because Forrest is writing her right at the dawn of the sexual revolution, and she's a polyamorous woman. She's a woman who has a very strong sex drive, is completely upfront about it, and her adventures often involve her having sex, with men, women, automatons. She was of her time, and she was an exploration of a new social norm through a sci-fi character. And so when Dynamite asked me if I would like to write her, I said yes, but I want to write her I want to use it to reflect attitudes towards sexuality and gender now, rather than attitudes towards sexuality and gender in the late 60s. So you don't have to change her, but you have to bring the world up to date around her. You have to give her a new situation to respond to.
Right. Especially because it's gone 180. There's a third wave feminism trying to cover up women nowadays. Do you get some problem from that? From third wave feminists or people complaining that you're writing what is essentially a cheesecake character?
I mean, it hasn't happened yet. The first issue comes out in December. I don't know how it's going to be received. What I'm doing is, so the first arc is about religious attitudes to sex. It's a little bit about female genital mutilation, but within a science fiction context. So it's about stuff that matters now and stuff that affects women's lives now. Having said that, I'm a man. I'm a white man. I'm a straight white man. And so I'm more than aware that I've got my blind spots, and I'm just hoping that I've managed to correct for those. But it was an offer I couldn't refuse. I just thought it was just too good to say no to.
Okay, I think that's good. I think we got half an hour. Yeah. Okay. So, Mike, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me.
My pleasure.
You're one of the favorites of the Portuguese audience because of the books that you worked on, and by the time I publish this, I will have seen your conference, which I'm sure will be very interesting. I'm also going to record that. But thank you very much once more. I'll be sure to send you a link so you can see. I'll probably keep the audio intact and just put subtitles on a video.
Fantastic. Thanks. So good to talk.
Thank you.